On this week's episode of Friend Code, we're talking about how Breath of the Wild holds up in 2020, the recently announced Hyrule Warriors, Age of Calamity, and what we expect from the sequel to Breath of the Wild. Hello, everyone. Welcome to a new episode of Friend Code. I'm your host, Michael Damiani. This week, I'm joined by Bradley Ellis.
Yo.
No achievements.
I haven't done that in a while, haven't I?
Really? I thought you... maybe you haven't done it in a while.
Achievements.
Thank you. You made my day,
there you
Brad.
go, Damiani.
I'm also joined by two very special guests. First up, Rebecca Stone of Twinfinite. How are you doing?
Hello. I'm doing well.
Thank you so much for joining us. And also, I'm going to do this. You told me to do this. Sir Kyle Hilliard of MinnMax.
Well, now that's embarrassing. It was a joke among friends, but thank you for having me. I'm very excited to hang out with you guys. I listen to Easy Allies. It's very exciting.
All seriousness, thank you so much for joining. We had some people in our community who actually heard what we were going to be doing for this episode of Friend Code, and they were like, you need to get Rebecca, you need to get Kyle. Please, please, please. Like, they specifically tracked me down or like, please get both of them. I was like, oh, yeah, sure, of course. And I'm just glad we made it work. You know, it seemed like this week has been a little bit hectic. This is a Nintendo-focused podcast, but there's been a lot of other stuff this week. We're recording the day of the PS5 showcase, so if everyone's
and they announced Super Mario Picross is coming yesterday. I mean, that's huge. You know, we're still
Donkey Kong Country 2. That one's legit. I heard that game's pretty good. Right? No, I'm kidding.
Man. Come on.
We had a debate amongst us. I was saying I actually think I like Donkey Kong Country the most, even though I recognize 2 and 3 have more innovations to them. Just something about like the simplicity of the first one. I just can't get over it for whatever reason.
Yeah. No, I'm with you, I think. But that's not what we're here to talk about. I'm sorry I brought it up.
No, like man, there's sometimes it feels like there's no news for Nintendo in a week. Other times it feels like there's just too much. And September honestly has been a month of a lot of Nintendo news, and it's not over yet. There's still maybe more to come potentially. We still have another Smash Fighter character that needs to be announced at some point. You know, maybe that's coming up in the next few weeks. Who knows? But we did get some new announcements regarding Zelda. And also, we're going to talk a lot about Zelda today, and that's where I'd like to start. Mm-hmm. Brad, you actually just finished a replay of Breath of the Wild, and I'm kind of curious. You played it on all through Master Mode, correct?
Yep.
Nice. So you played on the difficulty. I'm kind of curious. Let's start there. I want to know how you feel it holds up in 2020. Like, do you still feel good about it now, replaying it as you did before? Anything changed?
Short answer, yes. I don't think a lot changed my opinion of this game, Damiani, over time. I think what I loved about it the first time still holds true, and my disappointments with it are still there. Because, you know, like, you and me share a lot of the same grievances, especially with the story and how it's presented. That's kind of like one thing you and me always fall back on, and the dungeons in the game. But maybe even this time around, I was more impressed with the shrines and how creative they are. Especially because I felt they were more creative than a lot of the divine beasts themselves, like the scenarios they present to you. But yeah, I think what that game set out to do, it accomplished like really well, especially this vast open world, which Zelda, I mean, it had like, especially in the original one, like that feeling of like just going out there and just finding whatever. But yeah, overall, I think it's still fantastic.
It's an interesting point to bring up the story. How Breath of the Wild handles its storytelling. Basically, you lost your memories, and you have to piece together the mystery of what happened in the past to Link and essentially to Hyrule. I'm kind of curious for both you, Kyle and Rebecca. Obviously, how did you feel about that style of storytelling? Because it was the first open world Zelda game, and they're trying to also tackle narrative in an open world game. How did you feel about the story in the game when you completed it for the first time?
Yeah, I think it's interesting because the way that Breath of the Wild is set up is you can do as much of those memories and stories as you want to, or you could ignore it all and just go straight to the Divine Beast, or not even, just go straight to Ganon and focus more on the combat and the exploration if you want to. So I feel like it's ultimately up to the player to decide how much of that story do they want to pursue, how much do they value that, how much of the world do they want to uncover, which could be a different experience from one person to the next.
I mean, I always thought it was super effective. Like I really liked the way it was presented. I think it was like thematically consistent with what they were going for, of just like everything's open. The weapons you use, that's totally up to you. The order you tackle everything in, that's totally up to you. The way you absorb the story, again, that's totally up to you. And it was kind of this like weirdly classic kind of like cutscene reward that I don't get very often anymore. Like cutscenes are so common now that it's like during the PS1 era, it was like, oh my gosh, I got a cutscene. This was worth, staying up all night to play. I got a little bit of that sense again with Breath of the Wild because there wasn't a lot of it, but the little pieces that were there, I felt like were significant. And I also had this weird experience. I don't know if you guys had it similar. Rebecca, I don't know if you had it similar too, but like I reviewed the game. I was a writer for Game Informer at the time, and I was also on a print deadline. So I was like sprinting through that game. And like I had this moment of like 3 a.m. in the morning. I was watching that final cutscene. I was like, all right, I got to write this review tomorrow. And like I was tearing up. Like it was so intense and like weirdly moving for me. Like not only because of the story, but just because of all the exhausted circumstances surrounding it of like, I've got this new system. I got to get this thing done. Oh my gosh, Zelda's awake. Ganon looks incredible. Not many people have seen him yet. This is stunning. Like it was just this like crazy ending for me. So like in that sense, like the story really worked for me, but it was also like I had a very specific playthrough of that game that not everyone necessarily had the same thing,
Yeah, that's a good perspective to have, coming from like someone who reviewed it as well. Obviously, there was an embargo deadline, but with print, you have to get it in much sooner, obviously. Yeah. So for me, while there was a little bit of that pressure that I can't completely goof off and everything, I felt like I took my time. My playthrough style was I tried to explore as much as I could, and story stuff came much later. And as you were illustrating, Rebecca, it's player choice. It's all optional technically. You don't need to get all that stuff. You don't even need to do the quote unquote dungeons of the game, the Divine Beast. And I think that's part of the beauty of the game because it caters to so many different people. But the morsels I got of story, that was a great point too, Kyle. How you illustrated it about being more like the old school cutscene reward. It really did feel like that now that I think about it. And part of me, I don't know if it's such a negative against it so much as I wanted more. Is that more about the
That's what I'm talking about. Like a lot of the cutscenes you get with a lot of these characters are super brief, and you like kind of get to know them, like kind of. But I was with you, Don, and I was like, man, just need a little more from them.
It also I felt like the voice acting was like, it was not great, Sorry, I didn't mean to step on you there, Rebecca.
No, that's okay. I was going to go in the direction of it being all of the memory. The story took place in memories in the past. So it didn't even feel like you had any interaction with it. You were just learning what happened instead of being part of that.
That's exactly how I felt. Yes.
Yep.
I guess there's also an element of like, if you like that kind of storytelling too, like if you like that lost kind of like, I want to learn everything that happened, because there ultimately isn't a lot that happens in the present in that game, really.
No, everything happens in the past pretty much.
I honestly always took the stance because Nintendo, EPD, Anima and Fujibayashi, like them taking a crack at a truly open world Zelda game, finally truly delivering on the promise of overhauling and revamping what defined a Zelda game. There were more important things to get right first. Yeah. And I think what they came up, the framework for their narrative, I think was a very good solution so that they could get everything. And I think they did get everything else pretty much done. It was excellent in my opinion. So going on off that, one of the biggest changes, I think, also because it was also optional, were all the shrines they had, and as I mentioned, Divine Beast. I'm kind of curious, there's always this back and forth on whether the shrines and the Divine Beast satiated people's sense of curiosity, as in like, was it a good enough dangling carrot to explore the world, to go over that extra hill to find that next shrine, or did you find them maybe on the lacking side where you preferred something more like a traditional dungeon and kind of missed something like that?
To me, I feel like I did, as much as I like the Divine Beast, I did miss the traditional dungeons. I think that I did the Zora first Divine Beast, and that felt very magical. It felt like discovering the whole storyline with Sidon, with going through that Divine Beast and all of the puzzles within it. felt magical the first time, but then by the time I was doing the second, third, fourth one, to me they felt very largely the same. I think that making the Divine Beast having that elemental aspect that the traditional dungeons have in previous Zelda games would have gone a long way to making each of them feel more distinct. It felt like each of the four bosses were very, very similar. They didn't have too much differences between them for the most part, the Blight Ganons. So I see both. I did appreciate them, but part of me does miss that traditional dungeon.
Yeah, I mean, just that. It's funny. Everyone points to it as like, oh, it's kind of Metroid-like or Zelda-like, but it's just good design in general. Like, we don't necessarily have to tie it to a game, but just that idea of like seeing something that you can't solve and getting an item to go back and be able to solve that. That's like a core tenet of every Zelda up to Breath of the Wild.
Mm-hmm.
And I did miss that, but I think I would rather have what they ultimately delivered than to sort of, like have you take the dungeons in a certain order. Or maybe the other solution would have been like, there's an item in every dungeon that you use specifically to that dungeon or something. I don't know, but I did miss that element of Zelda,
I mean, I think a lot of the problem for me with it is just like the size of the beast is pretty short. You can get to these really fast. And like Rebecca was saying, yeah, it's really cool the first time you go on one. Like it feels awesome, like seeing this huge thing moving around and you're like rotating it. But then once you start doing that again and again and again, it kind of loses a lot of its luster. I think it definitely would have been more effective to have a change of scenery. And these like they kind of like have the same vibe inside. Like the game has that everywhere, like the Sheikah old tech everywhere in the shrines. I think if they switched that up a bit, it would have really helped.
Exactly.
Yeah. The atmosphere was just my biggest complaint, honestly. They all look the same. I was pleasantly surprised and enjoyed the more physics-based natures of the puzzles.
Oh yeah,
the tools you use.
The puzzles were great.
Yeah, that like absolutely loved that. I think the nature of what the individual shrines and also the kind of how the divine beasts were formatted kind of allowed them a little bit more freedom in puzzle design. And my hope is, well, I mean, we'll get to this later about hopes and dreams, for the sequels, that they learn some good lessons from that can maybe put some things more into focus going forward. But I absolutely thought with what they did for the opening salvo of like their open world Zelda stuff, the open air, sorry, they did a really good job for that. But I did miss.
I just appreciate that you corrected yourself. Like,
well,
there's a distinction between those two definitions. It's like, oh yeah, this is open air, dude. It's not open world. Completely different.
There's only one reason I did that is because our comments will be like,
they'll be all over
air. You. Excuse me.
Yeah.
They give it a specific term. It's like, all right, I'll give you. That's how it is. But I mean,
I appreciate that. Like, I appreciate it. Maybe it's not the right term, but it does feel like in the marketing they'd be like, this is an open air world. Like it's kind of like. They feel like they've discovered this idea and they've named it. It's like, well, we've played Far Cry. Like we've kind of done this before.
There's a hint of being facetious in there as well. But take a look at the game formerly known as Gods and Monsters, and that as well. It's like they didn't use the term, so it's like Nintendo. They're still the only open air making. I do want to talk about one other thing with Breath of the Wild. This was the most polarizing thing I saw about the game. Brad, in your replay, I'm curious if this ever even registered as an issue with you. The durability system with weapons. Saw so many people who just could not stand it and does not want it to come back. How did you feel about it in your replay?
So with this, I could go either way. There's things I really like about it. I do love having these weapons and being encouraged to mess around with them. A lot of people are afraid because they were afraid to run out of weapons, but even on master mode, that's only really an issue for the first few hours. Eventually I was just loaded with weapons, like constantly weapons I just couldn't even take because I was loaded up. I wouldn't be opposed if they changed some things about it. Like I'm fine with it if they do or if they don't. Pretty much I could see them sticking to it, Damiani, but maybe making it easier to, let's say, repair an item if you like it, or to increase its durability so it lasts a lot longer. So if you have I really like using spears in this game now, so you could kind of cater to that more.
That'd be a pretty good idea for them to do going forward. What about you, Rebecca? Did the durability system really bother you at all, or no?
Yeah, no, not really. I do agree with what Brad was saying about how it would be nice to have those extra options to increase the durability, or even have some that are more permanent. It's interesting to me because most Zelda games, and I think games in general, I feel like the difficulty goes from easy to hard as you go on throughout the game. I almost felt like it was the opposite in Breath of the Wild, where I had a harder time in the beginning with the weaker weapons breaking, my sticks breaking. Oh my gosh, I don't have a weapon now. I felt myself dying a lot more in the beginning than at the end when I had a whole utility of claymores and whatnot that I had found in Ganon's castle. So I feel like, yeah, with some tweaks to it, I think I wouldn't mind if it came back.
A funny question for you, Kyle. Every weapon in this game has durability, including the iconic Master Sword. Even that technically having durability, where it loses its forget what it is. It's like its essence or whatever. Did even that like bug you, or were you kind of even cool with something like that?
I mean, it was definitely initially something I was turned off by. I think for the same reasons as Rebecca, is that it seemed to apply this like level of challenge to it that I wasn't expecting early on. But over time, like, you kind of have to just come to terms with it. And when you do, and you recognize its value, which is to get you to try out different weapons and change how you approach combat, like with what you have in your hands, like, then I learned to really like it. Cause like, I never would have touched a spear if the first sword I found was, never broke and I just upgraded it over the course of the game. I never would have used the larger weapons. I just wouldn't have, because that's the kind of player I am. So the fact that like, when you get in this intense skirmish and you went through all your swords and you went through all your claymores and then you have the spears left over and you learn how to use the spears, like, there's value in that. But like, I totally understand people getting frustrated with that system, because like, it does, especially early on, it does feel like even the things that you're working toward as rewards get like taken away from you at a certain point. You know what I mean? If you beat a shrine and you get this great sword, it's like it's gone within the hour. And like, by the end of the game, it was not a frustration because I understood how the system worked. But like early on, it was definitely an obnoxious kind of thing.
Yeah, I'm trying to remember. I think the thing that stuck out to me the most was whether or not I had this feeling of I got a good elemental weapon, like a weapon that felt rare, like a lightning blade or fire blade or something like that. And do I save this up? If I ruin this, how rare is this? Like the question of that. And yeah, the more I played, the more I learned the rules. I was like, oh, they want you to be situational. They want you to. You're going to make life a lot more difficult for yourself if you don't actually pay attention to enemies and decide, oh, this one, it has an elemental weakness, maybe to this, or maybe use your bow and arrow from range, or a spear gives you more of an advantage against this, or the sword or an axe or whatever the heck you have. I was like, I get it. I wonder if, because it sounds like all three of you are in agreement with me that this was more strenuous in the opening hours of the game.
Yeah.
And I wonder
if that's the whole game.
That was the biggest hurdle for people to get over. If they could have found a way to maybe flatten the curve a little bit, to use a topical term.
Maybe you could have like a lower power weapon that doesn't break, but the better ones will, or something, like, just so you're never left without something.
Yes,
because you have a default sword or something.
Yeah, something
like that. I think, like the wood sword.
I mean, getting ahead of ourselves a little bit, because we are going to talk about potential ideas for the future. The idea of like fixing a weapon that you really like, I think, is cool, because I played through Zelda before all my peers, and the question that they would come to me with when they started playing wasn't, can I fix my weapons? It was, where do I go to fix the weapons? And then I had to be the one to break
kind
it
of
to
a
them,
standard, in a lot of games.
Yeah. So I think there's a desire for that, and I don't think it would really break the game, because it would still require material, and it would still require traveling and stuff like that. It wouldn't be, a lot of the times it would probably be easier to just toss it and then
I was going to say, I feel like the weapons are so plentiful in the game anyway. I'm not even sure that I would go out of my way to repair a weapon if I just know that there's going to be something else for me if I explore around the corner. But I think some balancing with that would be a route they could take.
Yeah, I agree. We'll definitely get into more. I know several of you have ideas, but I think it's one of the things people will be looking forward to learning more about when we see more of the sequel, whenever they're ready to show it off again. I am curious, though. We'll start with you, Brad. we got some patron questions about
Okay.
how we feel about Breath of the Wild on more specific things. And this first one comes from our patron Logan. They want to know, what style of Zelda do we prefer? And I'm going to probably speak for them, their interpretation here. They mean, like, do you prefer the open world Zelda? Do you prefer the more older, like the traditional 3D style of Zelda, like Ocarina of Time, Majora's Mask? Do you prefer the 2D Zeldas? Like, where do you kind of stand on that right now?
This is tough because I kind of like aspects of all of them. There's certain things I like about so the other 3D Zeldas, the older ones, I kind of liked sometimes the story shined better in that sense because it was laid out, I thought, in a more interesting way to me. Like, we got those moments like Ganon and Wind Waker and all that kind of stuff. I do love just being in Hyrule though, and kind of just going wherever the hell I want and just having this feeling of exploration. So, I mean, the 2D ones are kind of like the 3D ones, I guess, in their progression. Like, except for Link, what was it?
Link Between Worlds?
Yes, Link Between Worlds, where you can kind of go in your own order. So, I don't know. I like aspects of all of them. I do maybe prefer in the future for them to continue in this more open style, because I feel like they can experiment with that a lot more. There's only been one, so I feel like there's a lot they can mess around with.
For sure. What about you two, Kyle and Rebecca? Do you have a preference at this point on which style of Zelda you're into?
I mean, Ocarina was my first. That was the first
Okay.
Zelda game I played and beat. I've since, I quickly went back and played Link to the Past, embarrassed, frankly, that I took me so long to discover the series. But I think because of that, I'm always going to be kind of a 3D boy, like I'm going to be in 3 dimensions. But I mean, in terms of like the future, I would much rather see them, iterate on open world than be like, oh, let's take another shot at that Ocarina of Time style. But like, I wouldn't say no to that. Like, I would absolutely take that too, But I would order it like 3D open world 2D if we're gonna sort of, put it that way. But I mean, they're all so close and up near the top somehow, even though it's a list of 3 things.
Yeah, I have a hard time deciding a favorite too. I do have a soft spot for the 2D games, the top-down ones, more probably than most people. A Link to the Past was my first ever video game, and I feel like it's so hard to pick one of them when they're all shining, just like how Kyle said. I do, as far as you said, though, do hope that they continue to find a way to include open world aspects in it. I don't mind the linear nature of the older 3D games, but I feel like there is a way to incorporate that open world style while bringing back a lot of the things that shine from the other 3D games that we were talking about.
Yeah. Now, linear progression came up. Zelda is not generally known for being a very linear series, but one of the more recent entries, last year's Link's Awakening, introduced a lot of new players to an older style of Zelda and a more linear progression style of Zelda. And I'll just say personally, I still get a lot of enjoyment out of that. And I think in the past maybe decade or so, probably stemming from like the release of Final Fantasy 13. I'm just going to probably put all the blame squarely on Square Enix here, not unfairly, of course. That the linear became a dirty word all of a sudden. That linear means it's not good. Open world equals good. And I personally feel the Zelda series, and as well as some other series, highlight that that's not the case. Link's Awakening to me, and last year's entry or reimagining of it, or revamp, whatever you want to call it, showcase why that's the case. And I'm kind of curious if any of you kind of agree with that, if you feel you still get a lot of enjoyment from and still want to see a future for a more linear progression. Maybe there's some branching path here or two which dungeon you can go, but otherwise you're meant to go in this order. And
yeah, I mean, I don't have a problem with that, like something being linear, I guess. I think with Zelda they could still make it seemingly linear, but if it make you feel like you have a choice, kind of dumb how you're saying, like, even if you're just dumped on this huge map and you can kind of go wherever you want, but once you go a certain way it becomes much more linear. I could see them easily doing something like that.
Yeah, I think especially for games like Link's Awakening, it does, even though it is linear in nature, like you said, Brad, it does have kind of that feeling that it is open, because the world, you can still explore most places in the world. You can still uncover little secrets. Maybe you get an item and it opens up more of the map. So even though it is linear, you feel like you're still exploring freely in this world wherever you want to go.
Yeah, so I I wrote the cover story for Breath of the Wild for Game Informer, and part of that was a chance to sit down with Onuma and Miyamoto and talk to them about the game a lot before it came out. And one of the things that Onuma specifically talked about is like people would tell him, "Oh, like, oh, you guys, you need to do Zelda, but you need to make it like, open like the original was." And even in his memory, he said he felt like that you could take the dungeons in any order. Like he just that's how he remembered the game, and it wasn't until he revisited it prior to working on Breath of the Wild that he remembered it's like, oh yeah, this you have to take these in order. This is not a non-linear game. And I think that's part of went into both Link Between Worlds and Breath of the Wild was trying to take that feeling of, being able to go anywhere you want, even though in the original games it wasn't really like that. It just kind of felt that way.
Yeah, this is always an interesting topic. So speaking strictly from the sense of the way you're kind of meant to play through all of these games, Zelda 1, honestly, until Breath of the Wild came around, Zelda 1 was probably the most open-ended in terms of where you could go. There are restrictions there are very few restrictions that you can actually, in terms of access. I think there's like 1 or 2 dungeons you have to do in a certain order, but otherwise you can go to like one of like up to like 4 or 5 dungeons at the start. It depends on skill and what you come across. Like items aren't just like you can buy them from NPCs and stuff, but starting with Zelda 2 onward, they became mostly linear progression. As I said, maybe you could do 1 or 2 dungeons in a different order here or there, but otherwise they have like numbers attached to them and stuff like this is a level 2, this is level 3, this is in the credits, they label them in by order. They show you like Link Pass shows you like what order you were supposed to. I'm like, oh, okay. So I think
NPCs are like, go to the desert. No, go to the desert.
Yeah.
No, go south. No.
If there's any of that, looking for rose-tinted glasses about Zelda's openness and maybe a little bit of a misremembering and having a little bit too fond memories of that. So I do think while there's still a place for it, I'm definitely on the side of the three of you where I'd like to see them pursue more of Breath of the Wild style of game. There are plenty of excellent, linear style Zelda games or games that are more linear progression in the Zelda series. They've only done one open world Zelda game like this. So those are very good points. I think the last thing I want to bring up before I ask a final patron question about original Breath of the Wild, we mentioned Link's Awakening, and we talked a little bit about the dungeons in Breath of the Wild, and we talked about items and the structure of how you get items. And one of the most seen comments I saw besides being surprised by Link's Awakening's structure in terms of progression was puzzles. The puzzles were a little confusing in Link's Awakening to newcomers because the game didn't explain its own rules very well at times. The whole you have to find an item in a dungeon. These players were used to Breath of the Wild where you were given all of your items up front and explained, this is what you have. This is your toolkit. This is all you're going to need to solve any puzzle in the game versus more traditional Zelda where it's like, you might not have this item yet. You might completely be lacking this, or there's some puzzle in the dungeons like, what the heck does this even do? I've never seen this before. I'm kind of curious if you feel Breath of the Wild, the structure of giving you everything up at the front, did Breath of the Wild justice, and would you prefer maybe that, or do you maybe agree that the older style Zeldas have some like obtuse parts where this is a little too cryptic to figure out?
Yeah, I don't know. I that's a tough question, I guess. Certainly there is cryptic stuff, especially to like young players. Like you kind of forget sometimes. I mean, like I said, Ocarina was my first Zelda, like you forget that like every Zelda is somebody's first Zelda, so like I see a boomerang and I'm like, okay, I know what to do with this. But like there are certainly young players who are like, well, I don't know, I have to throw this thing? This is going to hit a switch for me, So like, yeah, it's interesting. And then like I have a daughter who I just can't never not bring up, but she seemed really woefully uninterested in Link's Awakening, despite it being very cute. But Breath of the Wild, like she got into and played a little bit. And I think that's just like a modern, this generation, a younger generation of kids like games like Fortnite and Minecraft or Roblox, where it's like you're just given tools and then you kind of do whatever you want with them. You know what I mean? Where I'm kind of like old school and I'm like, give me the thing to hit the switch so I can open this door and go through. Like I like being guided along, where I think younger players just don't, which is fine. It's just a generational thing,
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a good point, honestly. I mean, I've always kind of figured that maybe younger players, just the nature of older games. That's just how it is. Like whatever you started with, it's just commonplace to you. I think the thing I saw was there's a puzzle in Link's Awakening where you have to pick up the orbs in was it Eagle's Tower to break the pillars. And I saw a comment on it was on Reset Era. Someone's like, I didn't. Where was it said that I have to pick up these balls, like these orbs? I didn't even know they were orbs. Like, what the heck? Like, what? And I was like, but to me, that's so obvious.
Is particularly obtuse.
Yeah.
I don't know if you guys know Dan Reichert, former Giant Bomb guy.
Yes.
I worked with him at Game Informer a little bit. He would complain about that like years and years ago before there was even mutterings of like a remake of that specific puzzle. So that one in particular, I think, is just a little obtuse.
It's true, and I feel like a lot of the older Zelda games were cryptic like that, where they didn't have like a color to show us that you could hit a switch or something. And for us longtime Zelda players, we take that for granted, where we know we've played a Zelda game. We know how that progression works. We know how to use these tools and what the general mechanics are. We know when there's a crack in the wall, that means you have to bomb it. And in some cases, maybe there's not a crack. Maybe it just makes a different sound when you clink your sword against it. People who are just coming into the series for the first time don't know that. So you're right. I do feel like Breath of the Wild has changed that and made it a little bit more not obvious, but helps the player along with those mechanics.
Yeah, I was actually going to ask, do you feel Breath of the Wild, one of the things it does well is because maybe it's so intuitive, like figuring out the puzzles. There's as complicated as they can get. It feels like I can still figure this out. They've given me everything I need to know, and like the things they're showing me here, they make sense at all times. And I feel I feel they did a good job with that.
And the thing with Breath of the Wild, too, is often there was more than one way to figure it out. Like climbing a tower, if there's vines on it, maybe you could fly up. Maybe you could burn the vines. There was more than one way, so it encouraged lots of different experimenting to get to that solution.
I love that so much because it made me constantly ask, what is possible? What if I could do this? What if I could do that? And that was just so fun. I just want to see how far can I push before they're gonna say no. And most of the time it's like, wow, they really let me get away with a lot of cool stuff in here, and I appreciate this. I appreciate you letting me feel like this is a little bit more of a playground here. Try out what you want to try, and if you're creative, it worked. Good for you. It rewarded me. I was like, I like this. I like this feedback loop here. It's pretty good. So yeah, I want to wrap this up about Breath of the Wild discussion by asking if Brad, you just recently played through it, so you can judge it from playing it recently. I don't know when the last time any of us have played it, but did Breath of the Wild's release disrupt your rankings of your favorite Zelda games? Did it crack into the upper echelon? Like I guess our patrons, we have a patron question from Shy who wants to know. They specifically addressed it to Brad at first, but then to the rest of the panelists about basically they asked for our top 4 Zelda games now with Breath of the Wild.
Top 4, dude. Man.
You don't have to. I'm gonna say you don't have to give
so
4.
Hard.
You can do top 3.
I'll give 4, but let me just say these could change all the time. They're not set in stone. Okay, so right now it's probably Breath of the Wild, the original, A Link to the Past, Ocarina, and Twilight Princess. Oh, that's 5, but Twilight Princess 2, somewhere in there. Just scoot it in there somewhere.
Can't resist.
Yeah.
Oh man, I was gonna offer you an easy out. I was actually to redo it, give you the option to ask you if Breath of the Wild even cracks your top 4. Just a yes or no, and why.
It's somewhere in there. Yeah.
We can keep it to that. If it's gonna be too difficult to give your top 4 Zelda games, just does Breath of the Wild crack into your top 4 or 3 basically, and why?
I would say most of the time for me it does. Like you guys, my top Zelda games always change depending on what I'm in the mood for. But yes, yeah, I think it would rank pretty high, definitely in the top 4.
Okay, I'll be brave. I'll put some numbers out there, man.
Right.
Number one, number one's
numbers.
always going to be Ocarina of Time. It lives there. It has a home there that it will always be there. It is the game that made me want to think about games critically and write about games and all that stuff. So it will always be my number 1. I would put Breath of the Wild number 2. I would put Majora's Mask 3, which I wouldn't have a couple years ago, but playing it the 3DS version really cemented it for me. And like just the tone of that game and just the sort of darkness of it, I really love. And then then it gets kind of muddy because then it's kind of like I would probably put Link Between Worlds pretty high.
Oh wow.
I really like that game a lot. And then Twilight Princess would also be very high for me as well. So maybe number 4, it's kind of those two are tied, I think.
Yeah, I kind of agree with you, Kyle. My top 3 is a little bit different. I would probably go A Link to the Past, Ocarina of Time, then probably Breath of the Wild, and then 4 I feel like could be a number of games. I really like the Wind Waker, and I actually really like the Minish Cap as well.
I almost brought up Minish Cap. I
it's
love
very
Minish
underrated.
Cap.
Yeah.
I'm also have the difficulty with Brad where I feel like the top 5, top 6, top 10, maybe there's always in flux. I will say Breath of the Wild will probably always be in like, okay, if you want top 4, probably it's always going to be in my top 4. I was going to say if it's top 5, definitely, but top 4, probably it's up there. I can definitively say I don't think anything for, much like you, Kyle, I don't think anything's ever good for me on a personal level to throw in A Link to the Past. They had just a lot of emotional attachment to that game. I still think for me personally, it still holds up with each replay. It also opened my mind to games of more than just these side scroller action things, or you just get to a goal, get to an end of a level, complete this. There's exploration. I could kind of like revel in this world and bask in the music, and it looked pretty to me at the time. I was like, this is something special. I think it's what you probably felt with Ocarina of Time, honestly, because that wasn't too long after, that was up there with one of my earlier Zeldas too. So
it's like, I can feel other emotions than like anger and excitement playing a video game. I can also feel like a little bit of sadness and fear,
The first time I saw the Ocarina of Time title screen, I had this sense of like, I don't want to say panic, overwhelmed. Just seeing the Link riding an opponent through the Hyrule field, it's like
piano coming
this
in.
is gonna be a epic game. It's like I'm in for a ride.
My life's about to change when I press start.
I was like, I'm not ready for this game. This is gonna wow. But yeah,
I mean, going from 2D to that was insane at the time.
That was it's hard. It's one of those games I feel like you had to have been there when it came out to fully appreciate its magnitude. Some of those games, those old classics. But yeah, Breath of the Wild. We'll get back. This is a Breath of the Wild themed episode, so it's not the last you hear about Breath of the Wild to our listeners and viewers. But I want to shift gears and talk about. Well, we're going to talk about a game that's going to be in the past. It is the future of Breath of the Wild. Hyrule Warriors: Age of Calamity recently shadow dropped on us. Nintendo just shadow dropping a lot of their announcements this month. This is going to be it's a brand new game. It is a Musou game. So if you're familiar with Hyrule Warriors or Dynasty Warriors, or those types of games, it's like that. However, what we were shown of it made it look, they even had said that the Koei Tecmo team was working more closely hand in hand with the Zelda team. And I felt like that, I want to get our first impressions here, because for me, it came across immediately in that trailer, from the visual fidelity to the level of, they're trying to make this feel like an authentic Breath of the Wild prequel. Wow. I'm not sure if any of you got that vibe or how you felt after you saw that reveal trailer.
Yeah, dude, my expectations were very surpassed from what I'm not like a huge Musou fan. I played some of the other Hyrule Warriors, but I kind of lost interest. But this just like this focus on the story and like it actually looking like Breath of the Wild really took me off guard. I thought it was going to look more like the realistic style, I guess. So yeah, I was very impressed.
Yeah, me too. I played Hyrule Warriors on the Wii U. I liked it. It was good. I enjoyed it. I'm way more excited for this one because it does look like it's going to be, instead of just a Warriors game with a Zelda skin, it's going to be its own kind of standalone, explaining more of that Breath of the Wild story and giving us a little bit more depth and lore than what the first Hyrule Warriors had.
Yeah, I mean, we talked a little bit about the story earlier, and I really do genuinely like Breath of the Wild's story. Like, I really liked it. Like, part of the fun of like digging into everything was like finding lore, things outside of cutscenes and stuff like that. So like, I actually really like the story of Breath of the Wild, and like, so that was my initial reaction. It's like, great. I love the idea of digging into the history of this world, and I was also weirdly super excited that like the end of that game unless I could be totally wrong, but the end of that game's probably going to be a huge bummer. Like it's going to be a downer ending, which is like really exciting for me. Like I'm a fan of like a sad ending, you know what I mean? And I think or normally they would be scared to do it. They can take the Halo Reach approach of like, guys, like everything's going to be fine. So we're going to make sure this one ends on a note of like I want to see like bloodied Zelda carrying dead Link to, like that place where he's got to go to sleep for 100 years and then just like credits. Like that'd be amazing,
That's such a good point, because for anyone who's played through Breath of the Wild, you know how this is going to end unless there's some kind of twist where it's not technically
like you don't even have to really say spoiler alert, because that's like the opening of the game. It's like you've been asleep for 100 years.
It's like
you lost. Like we lost. Like that's what's happening here.
Yeah, it's like Rogue One. You know what has to happen at the end of this movie.
Yes.
Come on.
Remember those champions that you got to know through the memories?
Yeah.
Well, they died.
And you're gonna see it.
Yeah, I'm very excited because we get to spend more time in this world. We talked about before, this is all like passive in the past. We didn't live in the moment with this storyline. They're giving us this chance now. And I'm very excited about getting to just, even if it's just like big map, but it's not going to be open world, obviously. They're going to let me run through maps that show me how Hyrule looked 100 years ago. And that to me sounds fantastic and seems so appealing to me. And I'm very excited about that. And I'm just trying to imagine the possibilities now, because we are revisiting past, like what areas we're going to see and what areas you're excited to maybe like revisit pre-Calamity, and what characters are going to be playing as and stuff like that. So you did point, as we've pointed out the obvious, though. I want to start here. This is a Musou game. Dynasty Warriors, if you're not familiar with that term. It's basically hack and slash, glorified hack and slash, 1 versus 1,000 or the 1 million troops meme came from this genre, basically. If you're not familiar with that, we have a question from a Patron question from Steven, and they have a problem with one of their friends about convincing him to get into this game. So they say, so my friends and I love the Zelda franchise, and Breath of the Wild has quickly become one of my favorites. When it comes to Hyrule Warriors Age of Calamity, my friend dismissed it while I can't wait for it. When I asked them why, they say they already know why they already dismissed it. It's because they already know what's going to happen in the game because of Breath of the Wild, so they don't see any point in playing it. So other people may share the same viewpoint on this game. So could this affect the game? Could this affect the game's success? Also, could it be the fact that it's a Musou game and not an open world style like Breath of the Wild? Do you think that's going to also affect other people's those deleted here? Sorry, I'm going to assume it said to their desire to play through this.
That's a good point, that we do know how it ends up, but I don't agree with the fact that makes it not worth playing. Sure, we know how it ends up, but we don't know how it gets to that point. And there's no doubt that they're going to add, storylines and details that we don't know anything about. So I think it's all about that journey of getting there. When you play a Zelda game anyway, you know how it's going to end. You defeat Ganon or whoever the villain is, but you still want to play it to find out how you get there, how you do that journey. So I don't see that as a reason not to play this. As for the fact that it's not a traditional Zelda game, it's true that this is more hack and slash. It's a different gameplay style. But I think for anybody who does love the Breath of the Wild world and the Zelda storytelling, it would still be worth playing solely for that.
Yeah, I mean, that's why I'm playing it. They got me in with that, dude.
I mean, there will be that person out there, though, that is going to go like, oh, this is that Breath of the Wild sequel I heard about. I guess this is it. And they're going to play something that they don't expect, which is too bad and disappoint. I mean, it's a bummer. I would be disappointed if I was ready for Breath of the Wild 2 and I started playing this. Like, you kind of have to, know what you're getting into before you start. But yeah, I mean, I'm excited. It's just a spin-off. Like, just make sure that's Nintendo's job to figure out to make sure everyone knows that this is a spin-off. And I mean, I think the fact that it's not called The Legend of Zelda and it's called Breath
Hyrule
of the Wild,
Warriors.
Yeah, like I think that's a really good big first step. Maybe the only step they need.
Yeah, I mean, I keep getting tongue-tied because I keep wanting to call it Breath of the Wild Age of Calamity, where it's not. It's not that, because this is a unique situation. In fact, the most analogous thing I've seen of this was their own other Musou game, Persona 5 Scramble. It's not out in the West yet, but I got to play the Japanese demo of it a while back with another member of Easy Allies, Michael Huber. We were both shocked at how the authentic feel that it felt like this feels like Persona 5 in a lot of ways. I can walk around the different environments that were in Persona 5. There's a lot of story dialogue in here that makes it feel like this is it's just like even the combat used a lot of hooks that were present in the turn-based style of the combat. I was like, oh, okay, like the opening up an enemy an enemy to an all-in attack, or I forget what it was called, like that move you could do. And I'm getting that vibe from from Age of Calamity more so than Hyrule Warriors, because to me, you kind of talked about this a little bit, Rebecca. For me, Hyrule Warriors felt like, as you said, it was a Musou game with a Zelda skin, but it relied a lot very heavily on Zelda fan service. It was like, this is Zelda fan service, the game. Like, you want to play as these characters? Here they all are. Here they're doing these cool, funny moves. But like, at the end of the day, the environments in the game, even the story, was kind of like whatever to me. It wasn't really engrossing. It wasn't captivating. I was playing it because it had a Zelda skin. This leads me to believe it's going to be more than that. It's going to have more of a focus. And I trust this more to be, for those people who are worried about the Musou part of it, I feel very good. And we're going to see very soon. We're going to see at TGS, supposedly more, the next update to this game. I feel like the more we see of it, the more it will convince people that you should probably try this out if you had concerns about it. I got a little off track with that question there because I meant to start with something else. I threw myself for a loop there. I wanted to start with playable characters before you got into story because we still didn't really go into it, but that's a good point. Everyone wants to know about characters because Musou games, the wide selection of characters I just talked about, the original Hyrule Warriors, how many different characters you got to play was insanity. So one of our patrons, Crew, actually asked us about one of their favorite things about the original Hyrule Warriors was the large cast of playable characters from the Zelda franchise. So with Age of Calamity being focused on Breath of the Wild story, do you think they're just going to keep the roster to the champions and Link and Zelda? Or if not, what other characters do you think they're going to be adding to the game?
Yeah, so when they announced it, like I think a lot of people are sharing specific characters from Breath of the Wild. Somebody shared the flower woman who just yells at you for stepping on flowers. And I was like, that just sent me down this rabbit hole of like, oh yeah, they could put this person in there. They could put that person in there. They could put the leader of the Sheikah or whatever. That guy's weird. And then I like had this moment where I was like, oh wait, this takes place 100 years ago. Like none of those characters are alive yet. So I don't know. I mean, like, I think that maybe post-release they might add a bunch of wackadoo characters that don't have any canonical sort of, they're just there because it's fun to play as them. But in terms of like contextual, like, in that time frame, I don't know. Like outside of the Guardians and Link and Zelda, I don't know, Epona, I guess.
Well, we did see a little glimpse in the trailer. We saw Impa, who is old in Breath of the Wild.
Okay.
We saw what we thought was her younger. So it's possible we could be playing as her younger. I've seen
about
some
that scientist woman who like
Pura?
made herself a child.
Yeah.
Rebecca, was she? Do you remember if she was like? Is she a very old woman? Okay.
She might have been. I don't know. You're right. It's hard to say because 100 years ago, who was alive? Even characters that were around back then might have been really young. Like we saw Sidon in a lot of the memories. He was a baby. Like he's not going to be fighting. You mentioned, I think the Yiga clansmen, like, are they around?
Yeah.
Is this something that we could see? I did see a really good theory on our character Cass, the Rito Cass, but he might not be alive, but he talks in great length during his storytelling about his mentor who teaches him the songs. So I think we could see some original characters in this game who either were not in Breath of the Wild or were maybe just referenced in some way. Because I think Hyrule Warriors, the first one, did introduce some new characters. We got like Lana, was it?
Yeah.
Some original
Linkle.
ones. I think we could see some of that for sure.
There's also that little baby guardian in the cover art.
Yes.
Which I don't know what else to call it. But
Yeah.
that's got to be a playable something, right?
It has to be something. Like
I can't help but think with that he's going to be an ally of some sort, and then when the Guardians start turning on people, we're going to have to be forced to.
Oh no!
Yeah, it's gonna be brutal.
They're going all in on that.
I mean, that's
Brace
like the
yourselves.
only potential amiibo at this point, right? Like, because everything
Maybe.
else has already been
Yeah,
made an
maybe.
amiibo.
Yeah, they're reissuing the 4 champion ones, but it'd be nice if they made the baby guardian one. We did. I remember there was a scene where you, when you're Urbosa, you get clan members were assaulting, the Gerudo. But yeah, like, will you any of those people? It'd be interesting if we saw like the fathers or grandfathers of like some of the characters, that are your current champion substitutes, like, or leaders of certain tribes, like seeing them, like, oh, this was my great grandfather, or this is my grandfather, which leads into what you were saying a little bit, Rebecca, about original characters potentially.
You just made me
And
think King Rome, Zelda's dad.
Yeah.
he's in.
Yeah. I mean, there's a
I
couple
wonder
of,
if
like,
he could
he
be.
has
I
people
mean, I don't know if he would
walking around
fight.
with it.
Maybe he would fight.
Magic. I mean, if Daphnis and Hans and Hyrule can turn into a boat, I mean, they can make this work.
True.
Come on.
True.
I mean, I'm also with you, Kyle. I think there was a question about DLC. We had a patron question about that, and I think you hit the nail on the head that they're going to go with the more crazy, goofy stuff with the DLC, because what do you do after this? Like, the story's definitive here. Where you go from here, you go play Breath of the Wild. So, maybe bringing in, the other characters from the present and putting them just playable for fun or something like that.
Yeah.
I can totally see them doing, or a new challenge.
Are you going to
mode
be
or
able
something.
to? Are you going to be able to call in the beasts for like ultimate special attacks? Have they shown anything like that in the trailer?
They really haven't. There has been speculation that the divine beasts wander in areas they're not restricted to their zones like they are in Breath of the Wild. You can see them in zones they never appear in Breath of the Wild, because they're not infected by the malice, the calamity yet. So they're free. They're going to be used. I wonder, if that's like an ultimate summon, like when you're one of the 4 champions, that's like your ultimate attack, or there's maybe a boss fight where you take the role of them and fight maybe like a super giant guardian or something like that. That could be really cool.
I'd be okay with that. I wouldn't say no to that.
Yeah, it sounds kind of
I
fun,
wouldn't either.
actually.
Yeah.
I'm curious to see like more of a villain role from someone in this too, Damiani. Like, obviously Ganon's gonna be in here, but he'll probably just be like Calamity Ganon or something again. I
Such a
assume,
good point, because these games
would like
do
to
have the
see
villains. Yeah.
kind of like a figurehead almost.
Yeah, will he be a person as opposed
Yeah.
to like a fiery spirit this time? Yeah, that's a good point.
It's a good question.
I wonder, Brad, if they let you play as the Blights from their perspective for
Maybe,
the parts.
I mean, not.
That'd be crazy.
They played with some stuff like that in
boss
Hyrule
fight
Warriors.
as the Blight against. Yeah.
Do you think there'll be an end game tease for Breath of the Wild 2? Like something?
That's one of our patron questions as well, actually.
Yeah.
People are that we have let me just give it here from Bader, actually. Our patron Bader wanted to know, will there be any kind of hint or connection in this game to potentially something in Breath of the Wild sequel? Like, even if it's a revelation about something that maybe we didn't even see in Breath of the Wild, so it's like, wait, this has to come up again. Wait, this is something that's probably gonna be explored in Breath of the Wild too.
Possible.
Yeah.
Or do you think
maybe you'll find a cave and Zelda will point to it and be like, someday I'm gonna braid my hair and we're gonna go in there, and then you just like you just move on.
Yeah, I could see it happening. I wouldn't count on it. It seems like they're 2 separate projects, especially since there's the whole of Breath of the Wild that would be between them chronologically. It would be cool though.
Yeah.
I think if you 100% the game and beat it in the hardest difficulty, they'll give you the teaser trailer for Breath of the Wild 2, the next update.
Just the same thing.
Yeah.
Yeah, of course. No. I honestly don't think there'll be anything necessarily that will connect to Breath of the Wild 2. Being brutally honest, I think it'll offer more insight into Breath of the Wild. I think Nintendo, as much as Nintendo loves to like throw in Easter eggs, that's all they will be Easter eggs. I think when it comes to Zelda, they're very guarded about revealing stuff too early. And they don't, while it's clear the sequel, we'll talk about the sequel in just a little bit. The sequel is a continuation of the original Breath of the Wild. They don't generally plan around story first and these big connective stories, despite, that has been a subject of debate for a very long time. I would imagine in this game, it would be highly unusual to have something significant revealed here that would be paid off in Breath of the Wild 2. I'm not saying it can't happen. I just personally don't think they will go that route with this. But I'd love to be proven wrong.
Yeah, I'm inclined to agree with that. I would love it, but I don't expect it.
Is there any areas from Breath of the Wild that you want to see given more attention in Age of the Calamity? This is a patron question from Wavy Chula. They'd just like to know if there's any zone or something you'd like to see more
Castletown.
of.
Castletown. It's always just wrecked now. I never get to see it in its prime, dude.
I think just that sentiment for all of the areas. We see everything in ruins. The Castletown, we see the Temple of Time in ruins. I think when this game came out, everybody was saying, well, I want the DLC or whatever next game to be rebuilding all of this. And now we might finally get to see, well, what did this look like beforehand? What was it like when there were more towns and more people?
I mean, one of the most Zelda super nerd exciting moments for me playing Breath of the Wild the first time was coming across Lon Lon Ranch and having that moment of oh, this is like a farm, huh? Oh, that's weird. Wait, hold on a second. And then pulling up screenshots of Lon Lon Ranch from Ocarina of Time and being like, oh my God, I'm at Lon Lon Ranch. Yeah, so, I want to hang out on Lon Lon Ranch.
Yeah, I think we could definitely see a lot of stuff like that.
Yeah.
I feel like there's so many opportunities for Easter eggs for that too, because so many areas had names tied to because there's no official continuity in this game to the other games. It's still up in the air at this point, but so many names were Easter eggs. They could play all day with that, bringing stuff up. Even the Tingle Islands and stuff, maybe Tingle will finally show up in there or something like that.
I mean, you could find that that statue from Skyward Sword that fell to the ground at the end of Skyward Sword. That stuff is such an easy get for me, because that's you know what I mean?
And
that's
Hyrule Warriors
me...
feels like the place that they would do that they would explore that, considering the last game, how they had that much fan service. I feel like we could get a lot of that here.
Yeah, please give it to me. I'll take it.
Yeah.
I want to wrap this up by asking, this might seem like an obvious question, but it was a big question until this game was announced, but maybe it's still up in the air. Is Hyrule Warriors Age of Calamity?
Just call it Breath of the Wild 0.
Yeah,
let's
just call it Breath of the Wild 0. Breath of the Wild 0. Is this Nintendo's big holiday title? The November release, everyone was questioning. Is this it?
I do think so, yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I don't see what else, unless there's just a new Mario game randomly coming out or something.
I mean, do you feel it's big enough, I guess, to qualify?
I think Animal Crossing was big enough.
Yeah,
they
I was
don't
gonna
have
say.
to worry about it.
Yeah, big enough. They're going to have enough on their shelves for this holiday. I think that this is big enough, like you said.
Yeah, I mean, to me, it was funny when it got announced, because I still had some optimism of maybe we'll get Breath of the Wild 2 this year. But the moment they announced Age of Calamity, I was like, that's very exciting. That is also a confirmation that Breath of the Wild 2 is not coming out this year, which is fine.
It's so funny. Watching that reveal trailer, I kept saying, oh, Breath of the Wild sequel is getting delayed. And everyone loved to point out how it never had a title, dude. How can it be delayed? And I'm like, I meant internally. It's internally, of course. I was I still believe there was a chance it was going to come out this year, even with COVID. It's there's still a chance to come out. This would be a really good time as a counter to the new consoles, please. And it's no, this is pretty much, this was the nail in the coffin. It said this is it. But it is being themed with Breath of the Wild. I think it's a genius move. I absolutely agree. I mean, I that's why I said it's obvious. Obvious to me, this is their big holiday title. I mean, they didn't even need this. Nintendo was doing so well with everything else. They really did not need anything to go up against the new consoles this fall, or to even maintain momentum for the next few months. But this is going to just this is probably going to be not only one of the best-selling Zelda games. Watch, it's going to surpass so many of them. It's going to be the best Musou game ever. Musou game, absolutely.
Probably,
easily take that crown.
It draws in so many different types of players. I feel like it's going to hit everybody who wants to play this sort of thing.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I want to move into our final topic, which is the sequel to Breath of the Wild, the game that is not coming out this year, that Inuma actually gave us a message, an update saying that we have to wait a little bit longer before getting an update on that. Whatever you want to read from that, you can take away, but it doesn't sound like it's going to be that much longer potentially until we see it again. I'm curious more about what do you three want to see in the sequel? Brad, having you recently replayed Breath of the Wild, you have it the freshest in your memory. All the stuff we've been talking about with what we loved in that game, what maybe we didn't like, and the stuff that we're probably going to see in Age of Calamity. What direction do you want to see them go with the sequel?
I want proper dungeons, or like different themes at least for dungeons. I want a little more variation there. I'm really happy they're showing Ganon at least already. I need Calamity Ganon is fine he served his purpose, but I miss this threat kind of taunting you throughout the story. Like he's just kind of back there in the castle, but you don't really like talk with him or interact with him really at all until the end of the game. So I'm hoping they do that, and I hope Zelda's involved a little more in this story. It kind of seems like that. I think Zelda is really good usually when Link has a companion character, since he doesn't really talk himself. So I think it's good to have a character talk for him, kind of like how Midna does, stuff like that. So I hope Zelda kind of fills that role for him.
Brad, you said all of the things that I want as well. I think that those traditional dungeons, at least the fact that they're a little bit more themed, would go a really long way for this sequel for me. The other thing that you didn't mention that personally I would like is we saw all of this Sheikah technology in Breath of the Wild. I would like to explore into that a little bit more and see more of the Sheikah people, what that technology is like, a little bit more background on that. Maybe they have time to make it grow again now that they're rebuilding, as well as the Sheikah slate and the runes. If they're not going to bring back the traditional items that we have, like the hookshot, boomerang, all those things, to get more variety in the runes, because I think those have a lot of potential as well. I would like if they do bring back the how many it was from Breath of the Wild, to maybe include some more to take the place of items if we're not going to get that back.
I don't want co-op. I think that's something that people are.
I don't really want that either.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, I don't know. I do like the idea of like Zelda being playable. I think that'd be really cool in like a mainline Zelda. I also like the idea of her being a companion, but I don't think I want it to be co-op. I also because you said that Onuma did say that it will be in the same Hyrule. He did say that.
So let me bring this up. So we have a Patron question. Those more about what we wanted to see from Kerbu, who wanted to remind us that in a recent issue, from a recent quote attributed to Game Informer, this is the quote: "One of the reasons we wanted to create a continuation was because I wanted to revisit that Hyrule again and use that world again while incorporating new gameplay and new story." So they wanted to ask us how we felt about the potential that it's going to be the exact same world again, and what do they need to do to make it feel different. But sorry, continue with your point first.
Well, I mean, that was kind of just like I just want to bring that up because I think I do want that. I think I want to revisit that Hyrule. I want to see how it's grown and changed over time. I don't know how much longer it takes place after the original game, but like there are certainly instances like there hasn't been a lot of success. I mean, maybe there are examples that I'm not thinking of, but like the one that comes to mind is like Crackdown 2 took place in the same city as Crackdown 1. And that was like a huge bummer, but that also like that setting wasn't really a place I loved and liked being in and wanted to see it change. Like in that kind of game, I was like, I'm ready to go to a new place. Let's go to a new place. But here, like I want to find new things in that huge world. I love that world. I think there's like a really cool opportunity to like put new stories within that world. So that's something I do want. I don't want them to overhaul and create a new Hyrule. I kind of want that like Majora's Mask approach where it's like we take we take assets, we change things, we get a little more experimental. Like that's my hope for it, is like it's surprising and experimental. With a Zelda game that was already pretty experimental to begin with. So
I like the point you brought up. No, go ahead, finish.
Just quickly, I was gonna say it's like one of those things that like I just want to be surprised, which is like a weird thing to ask for, you know.
Yeah.
But I'm sorry. Please go ahead, Rebecca.
I like the point that you bring up about Majora's Mask because I feel like they can use the framework and assets and everything they have for Breath of the Wild and give us a new, fresh experience with it. I wouldn't mind seeing something a little bit darker, maybe something just building on what they already have and giving us all those things that we had before that we want back as well, and just making it a huge grand experience. I think has the potential of making it better than the first game, in my opinion, if they can pull that off.
So I agree with you, Kyle, that I want to feel surprised. As long as they can make me feel surprised and make me feel like it feels new, I'm good with that. My concern to your point and what you talked about, Rebecca, is that I feel like there's already the best opportunity to do this would have been in a prequel. Seeing like Hyrule rebuilt would have been, oh man, how this looks like there's civilization here. That's one opportunity. But if we're going to go forward, I feel like they have to, for me, it has to be a radically overhauled Hyrule. I don't want the same geography because it'll be like, oh yeah, there's some new things here, but this is still the same largely environment that I've been to before. My concern is that it'll feel every game that, granted, none of these are open world games that I'm going to illustrate here, but every game that I've ever played that was a sequel that took place largely in the same world, mostly been like RPGs, like Final Fantasy X-2, Tales of Xillia 2, like two ones that's come to mind. There's been like one or two others, but everything else but the environments appealed to me in those sequels because they were literally the same. They tried to like maybe age them up. A few years of development have happened, but otherwise the sense of exploration was completely gone. I think, to be fair, I think Breath of the Wild sequel can do a much better at that with open world nature. But for me, I'll just say I really hope, I'll disagree and say I really hope. I don't need a new Hyrule, Kyle. Just go to a new land. Go somewhere else. Give me a new world. Period.
I think that quote that you said doesn't necessarily mean that it's going to be the same exact map. I think we might see what's beyond the mountains in the map that we already explored. We could still go, maybe they go on a journey someplace else, but it's still that Hyrule. It's still the same, sense of exploration that we felt on the map. It's just new area. I don't think it's going to be the exact same map that we were exploring before without, it could still be the same Hyrule without doing that.
Thank you for pointing it out. Like, the warning here is to maybe not take the quote so literally. When it comes to Zelda stuff and pre-release stuff, it's better to be a little bit cautious than take it as, this is fact. This is cemented. It will not change. Yeah, the world of Hyrule can be much larger than what we just saw. I mean, you go to the boundaries, you see giant land masses beyond where you're allowed to go. It's like, oh, what's over there? Maybe next
What's
game.
beyond the mountains? What's past the ocean a little bit?
Also, the tease of maybe underground. That is also a Zelda 1 theme was all the dungeons were called underground labyrinths. Maybe there's a giant underground labyrinth under there, like a labyrinths plural, that you're going to go explore. Who knows? Like the possibilities are endless, as long as they have some layer of that going on, some different area, underground. I'm really thrilled because I just don't know how much, it doesn't seem like a lot of time has passed between Breath of the Wild in this game to like radically alter the landscape of the environment to satisfy what you were alluding to, Kyle. Not saying they can't do it, but that's where my concern comes from. Not sure if that seems, if that's founded or not. That makes sense.
Yeah. I mean, I also like the idea of it just like Hyrule like being there in full, but like 90% of the game takes place on an island, off to the east. Like it's just there just as like we made it. It's part of the world. You can run around it if you want, but the game you're playing is actually over here on this island. That'd be weird.
That would be so amazing.
Red Dead
taking
2,
so long.
Red Dead 2 got really close to pulling a trick like that, honestly, but not quite. Where it was like, you know what I mean? Like there was a lot of Red Dead 1 in there, but there wasn't really like anything you could do over in that section of the game, like
gotcha.
Okay.
I'm not familiar enough with Red Dead 2. I've barely touched it, but
you should play it. It's a great game.
I need it's a game I definitely need to play.
Has anyone recommended that to you?
Yes. I think a few people. I think this guy named Brandon Jones has told me about this game a few times, just a few times. There's actually a little bit of like a interesting Easter egg about precedent for something like this. The original Zelda 1 its map is in the map of Zelda 2. Like Zelda 2 is like a
Mhm.
much larger world where part of it, the small part of Zelda 1's map is still there. Or sorry, Zelda 1's map makes up a small part of Zelda 2's map. Maybe with the sequel, it's like, hey, remember Breath of the Wild's giant overworld? It's just a small part of the larger world, like you said.
Yeah.
That would be amazing, man. Yes. I would love that idea. I love that idea. That makes me very excited.
You also
now.
have the route. You just made me think the route of like games like A Link to the Past, where you get the Dark World aspect of it. So it's the same map, but it's different because it's And then same thing with Twilight Princess did something very similar.
That's a really good point. Yeah.
Yes, and that's
very smart.
That's their bread and butter, I feel like, and that's one of the things they did so well back in. And when's the last time they revisited it? Was Twilight Princess? No, Link Between Worlds. That you go back and forth.
What,
but
Dark World?
In 3D though, it's like Twilight Princess was really the last one with like the Twilight Realm, right? Skyward Sword didn't have any of that as far. Yeah. So I mean, it's been a while. It's been 14 plus years since since Twilight Princess. I would not object to them bringing back that concept and seeing them do it in an open world game. Yes, that's great. So good. I'm kind of curious. We talked a little bit about item structure. Items. You already alluded to like maybe they increased the amount of runes. You said, Rebecca, like the technology there. So I'm curious. Do any of you have any thoughts or opinions on do you think they're capable of making a Zelda game that if they, let's say they introduce traditional dungeons and they want to bring back like the item, like unique item thing, is there a way do you think there's a way for them to do that where it's not introduced at the beginning? So you have to find an item out after the fact, but not feel like dungeons are so one-dimensional in terms of like you absolutely need this item. Do you think they can have that flexibility? Because we talked about the appeal of the shrines and even the Divine Beast, that wonder of being able to solve something so many different ways. Do you think they could pull that off if they did that?
Some of the items just give you an advantage or something to make it easier for you to do something. Like if you get the hook shot or something, you can bypass a huge part or something like that. But I think they could still design a level without that. Theory, though, Damiani, you're not going to have the Sheikah Slate in this game. It's going to get broke. Ganon's going to break it.
So
Link's
we're going to
hand,
do Metroid.
That shot of Link into like his hand and the trailer shot or whatever, like that's going to be some weird corruption on Link's hand that will be your new tool that you'll use.
Okay.
I like that theory.
Good theory.
I mean, you guys have brought a hook shot a lot. That is like the one... it's not like I missed those traditional Zelda items necessarily in Breath of the Wild, but the hook shot is something I think could be integrated really well. I mean, I think it would be really hard. I'm not a designer. I can't imagine how difficult it would be, but like to have that hook shot to let you bypass big swaths of climbing, I think would be really awesome. Like I would really like that.
The climbing was a big complaint for a lot of people, especially when it rains. It's hard to climb, big cliffs and whatnot. Like how Brad was saying, I feel like that thing could be optional, but really helps you with your exploration later on if you do want it. So you could still climb to get there if you wanted, but maybe later you find the hook shot and it helps you get there a little faster, pass by bigger parts.
Yeah.
I like the idea of going... So I like the idea of going into a dungeon and you can do about half the dungeon, but within that dungeon, you need the hook shot to complete it. And then outside of the dungeon, it just becomes an aid in exploration. And then I would like to see a series of dungeons like that with you need the item to complete that specific dungeon, but outside of the dungeon is just like a bonus item, which I guess is pretty much how typical Zelda items work, right? I mean, if you really think about it. Like
I can see them doing things like upgrades too. Maybe they upgrade your bombs somehow, make them a little bit better.
Which they already, I mean, they did. You do upgrade all of them once, right?
Yeah, a little. The stasis thing. Okay.
Yeah.
Maybe more dramatic though, upgrades.
Yeah, that'd be cool.
Yeah, I feel like some kind of like reward, having some kind of reward system where you go explore over here, you find a bonus shrine, and that now powers up X ability or X item or something like that would be a really nice way to encourage that. Think about the hook shot. I think those are really good points about aiding in traversal. I think it'd be brilliant for them to combine it with the glider, paraglider, just pulling Batman Arkham style. Like you grapple and like launch yourself off of like a rampart or something. You shoot yourself out,
yeah.
and like now you got extra. You can keep yourself gliding further and further. One of the things I'm curious is like we had horses, but there were asked for some kind of maybe flying system or mount, like flying mount type thing. That could be your solution. It's like it's not quite full flight, but as long as you're near like a high enough structure, you can just keep relaunching yourself up and stuff, and that can be kind of fun. I think.
Just make it Just Cause. That's all we want.
Like, there you go. Just make it just. I forgot. Yeah, I forgot they do that too. Yeah, I always feel like they have a big hurdle, big challenge to overcome when it comes to like how they place items in the game, when you get them, and how important they are to dungeon structure. I think the biggest pushback I see from people who are against the idea of introducing items later on is that, as you said, people do not want to get to a point in a dungeon like you cannot solve this. You can't complete this dungeon. You need this item. They're like, no, that goes against the spirit of Breath of the Wild. I was able to do anything as long as I was clever enough. I had all the tools. So now that puts extra onus on the developers. We need to figure, as Brad suggested, maybe just hooks it up to a higher level and it gives you a shortcut if you have it. Otherwise, you're going to go through like a gauntlet of enemies if you don't have it. It just makes it harder. But is that going to be appealing? We're assuming maybe they have multiple dungeons. After the second or third time of that trick, isn't it will that get old? And you'll be like, if I don't have this, I'm just going to have to fight a few more enemies. That's all it is. Like, can they make it more meaningful, I guess, is the challenge. Like evolving puzzle solving like that by how many items you have access to. I think that's a really big challenge for them. And I'd love to see them try it. I think that would elevate the game a lot compared to its predecessor. Is there anything about? So we talked about Zelda and playable Zelda. I'm with you that I don't want multiplayer in this game. I'm kind of curious, how important do you think it is that Zelda is playable in the sequel? After the history of like kind of the interviews they've given about why Zelda hasn't been playable, basically lore reasons. Sometimes it's come across a little tone deaf about okay, it's not a malicious reason, but at the same time you're not really cognizant of why people are asking for it. Do you think it's essential that she's playable in this game, or do you think they'll be okay if she's not playable?
I think it's essential. I could see her having another role as long as she does have another role and she's not absent for 90% of the game. I would like to see her have a little bit more of an active role. I do think a lot of the games where she does have a more active role in have been some of the greatest ones where she shines. So I would like to see that. That doesn't necessarily mean having her playable. If it is, I would rather it just be in minor segments or smaller segments instead of the whole game.
I think Link will be the main character still, but I think there could be parts where she does play a role in some more. I don't know. She'll do like magic or something, just something else different than Link that Link doesn't have.
Yeah.
Like maybe she'll use the Sheikah Slate or something instead of him. I don't know.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, this is just on my mind because of the Prince of Persia remake, and I was playing Prince of Persia 2008 recently, which is where you have Prince and Elika. And the way that game works is like you're playing as the prince, but you're basically playing as both of them at the same time. Like there's a lot of abilities where she comes in and helps you do like an extra leap or something like that. I think that would be kind of a cool approach of like, you're mainly controlling Link, but when it comes to like climbing and doing different things, like Zelda is part of the animation and she's integral. I think that would be really cool. I mean, I would really love, as just like a longtime Zelda fan, but the series and the character, of like that sort of Metal Gear Solid 2 Raiden approach, like see Link from somebody else's perspective. You know what I mean? Like the hero that you've been playing as for decades. Like you get to play as Zelda, you get to learn more about Zelda, and you get to see a different side of Link. I think that would be really amazing. I think Nintendo would be scared to do that. I think they would be nervous.
The thing that makes me hesitant about that is that Link is just not really a character so much. He doesn't talk like Raiden and Snake are like very vocal characters in their own personalities. I'm not opposed to that.
Some would argue.
Yeah, like we got brief snippets of that in like Zelda's journal or diary or whatever in Breath of the Wild, but yeah, I think there's room to experiment with it, but I don't know how far they'll go.
Yeah. That is a very good point. I mean, is watching Link. Yeah, if you're playing a Zelda and you're like, oh, let me learn about Link, is it just watching a character kind of grunt and like, just like kind of stare in the distance while you open that door? There might not be much there.
It also makes me think about the Spirit Track system because having Zelda technically playable in that game, like if that's the more realistic approach where they split it up like that,
like segments.
My dread is I don't want toggle where I'm playing as Link, hit a button, now I'm playing as Zelda. It's like I think that will completely ruin.
It's like RE0, too much.
I don't think they should do that. I think I agree. It's like staggering it into sections or just a small portion, or she's alongside you, like she's your guide, or she's using a Sheikah slate. Like, all right, I've done my like research here. I'll highlight some things for you. It feels like you're actually working in tandem together because
that would be perfect.
I think that's the dynamic they need to nail. Whatever they do, they need to nail that dynamic, or for me, it's going to be a bit of a letdown, honestly. But
I mean, it's going to be a huge bummer if what we saw that E3, that trailer, that was the opening of the game of Zelda getting taken
screen
away.
time.
That's
the biggest tease.
Yeah,
that's the real nightmare. Actually, that was Phantom Hourglass, man. This great character Tetra, and then like whoa, she rocked in the Wind Waker, and all of a sudden we're in Phantom Hourglass at the beginning. Like, okay, Link and Tetra, Zelda going on an adventure together. She gets kidnapped. It's like, okay, great job.
I really did like her role in Wind Waker, though. I think if they could do something similar to that, because she even had, as Zelda, had a role in the final battle as well.
I mean, that's another example of them working in tandem, like the final boss fight of a lot of games. I mean, Ocarina as well, like she kind of helps you out. Like, have that integrated throughout the whole game. I think that'd be really cool.
So that's I really like that. And what I was trying to get at before I forgot, I was struggling to find the answer now, and you just reminded me. Majora's Mask and the Wind Waker. Majora's Mask was the first instance of not the mask, but the Seikon's hideout, where you switch between Cafe and you. That toggling, but then in the Wind Waker, you took full control of your. But there were some sections when you lost them or something like that. So like in dungeons, I could see that maybe making sense, something like that. That was one of the most unique moments for me in the Zelda series up until maybe like the item renting in A Link Between Worlds and Open World in Breath of the Wild was co-op, like you co-op dungeons, but you're controlling both characters yourself. I was like, and they each have unique abilities that you need to use in tandem to solve. I was like, they really never went back to this again. And there's a real big opportunity, I think, maybe, as long as it's not like the entire game is go back and like move Link here, now move like Four Swords Adventures playing solo is what I'm dreading. Where you have 4 Links and you got to maneuver them individually. I hate that. Was horrible. I don't want anything like that ever again, basically. Oof. Bad nightmares about that. This one, there's a lot of talk about the music and audio design in Breath of the Wild. And one for its minimalistic approach. But if you actually get the soundtrack, there's a ton of music in Breath of the Wild. Really good soundtrack. I'm kind of curious if the three of you, if you would personally prefer to see them continue that approach, the more minimalistic approach, or do you feel maybe they should go back in the other direction, where riding across Hyrule, you have like the epic Hyrule field theme kick in or something like that? Or do you think maybe there's a solution in between potentially?
I really did like the music in Breath of the Wild a lot. And I think the minimalist sounds for it made sense for the exploration of the world. It felt very, you're alone in this giant world, and it made sense for that. And then when you got to the villages, the sounds became more dynamic. The songs stood out a little bit more. So I don't necessarily think that it would be that same way in the sequel, because it's going to be a different situation. It's going to be a different atmosphere. So I didn't mind it in Breath of the Wild, but I feel like there's room for the music to be more dynamic in the sequel.
Yeah, I just sometimes I think about like Dragon Quest, Damiani, like Dragon Quest 11. Like I love the music, but it just like that overworld theme, it's just like the same thing through the whole game. Thinking about if I'm in Hyrule Field just messing around for hours, like kind of need a break every now and then, like if it's just the same thing repeating over and over and over. If they throw in a lot more variation, that could help, but I kind of want to see them experiment more with the system how it is right now. I do like that feeling of kind of that isolation feeling you get from it.
Sure, yeah.
Yeah, loneliness, I think, is a word that Rebecca used of like, that game does feel lonely, to its credit, in an interesting way. But in our, imagining of what the sequel could be if Zelda's with you a lot more,
Yeah.
then maybe there is more music.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know. But yeah, I mean, I love the sort of like really overt Zelda score. Like I'm a fan of that, but like I think it just worked really well in Breath of the Wild. Even if I did kind of miss the more specific, like, the Forest Temple music and stuff like that. Like that, it kind of lacked that. But like it
Yeah,
just worked.
sure.
It worked so well. Like it was so like when there were these, musical swells, it was really compelling and interesting and moving.
One of the things I really liked and appreciated the most about the sound design in Breath of the Wild, I hope they continue, is the way sound informs you in the game. Like when you're approaching too cold of a climate, too hot of a climate, like when there's like danger, those little melodies they play, those few notes that will like basically it trains your brain to like that's it, like I need to switch gear, or someone spotted me, like stuff like that. I think they did an excellent job with that and just hammering that home. I really hope they continue at least that part of it, because I found it very effective and I found it very immersive for me, rather than having some kind of like on-screen pop-up or something like how other games tackle it. This just felt so natural to me.
I think we'll all get anxious every time we hear those really high-key piano notes of the Guardian after you.
I want to know what's the new version of those? Like, what is like the new terror that's going to intimidate you, that you feel this sense of dread? They did such a good job with that, I think, in the first game, and I want to see more of that in the sequel too. It's just enemies that you feel genuinely feel threatening, that I feel like I'm at a disadvantage. I feel like I should probably lose this. Like that was like the mystique around the Guardians for a long time, until I finally decided to confront them, and getting over that, like it's like a fear. Once you get past, it's like I even though they're still intimidating, I know how to deal with them now. I love that moment in a game, especially in Breath of the Wild. And I really hope they deliver more of that. Like whatever that new enemy type is, I hope they nail it again for sure. Yeah, but for music, I'd like to see a little bit of a mix, but then again, I always forget how much there was a lot of music in Breath of the Wild. Like all the towns had the music constantly playing. So I would even be satisfied. Like the first time you enter a new environment, it plays like a theme and then it stops. It goes back to like, just playing nature sounds or something like that. Yeah, I that for whatever reason, that and dungeons were like the most polarizing thing I ever saw about Breath of the Wild. We talked a lot about dungeons. We didn't really talk so much about bosses. I'm kind of curious if you felt, you felt the boss fights were good enough for Breath of the Wild, and what you'd like to see them do in terms of bosses in the sequel.
I kind of like with some of the bosses are related to the actual environment and like the temple itself. Like I do like they tried something different with them all being kind of parts of Ganon, but I kind of miss when like I go to this specific zone and fight this very specific enemy tied to this area. So yeah, I hope they do a little more of that.
I do. I feel like I beat some of the bosses just with
your
literally throwing bows and arrows at them and like throwing swords at them. I would like a little bit more puzzle solving, because I love that about Zelda bosses, is like once you figure it out, like it's really rewarding to do go through the process that you've figured out. And I feel like Breath of the Wild lacked that a little bit. Like I still enjoyed the boss fights, but I missed the puzzle nature of the boss fights.
I think a big part of that is because we didn't get a new item in the dungeon to use. Most of the boss fights in Zelda games have to do with, okay, I got this new item. I used it throughout the dungeon to solve puzzles. Now I have to use it in most cases to fight the boss. So you're right. A lot of the divine beasts were just, okay, I need to hit it with an arrow and a sword because there weren't those new items.
Such a good point. I do really miss that as well. I'd even take, if they're just going to go the approach where you're just going to get all the items up front again and they add a few more. If you can recall, I don't know if everyone played it, but the Mr. Freeze fight in Arkham, was it Asylum City? Sorry, where you can only use one variant and that's it, and you have to find multiple ways. You have to use multiple different tactics to take down Mr. Freeze. I'd love to see that in a Zelda boss. Like, oh, I can just jump in the air and freeze, slow down time, and shoot a bunch of arrows at its crit spot. It's like, okay, now I'm going to defend against that, and you can never use that again. I would love that, where it's like, and you only took 1/10 of my health off, so good luck finding out 9 other ways to do damage to me. Maybe not that extreme, but I would love that to solve the puzzle element if that's the approach they took.
You just reminded me of the boss fights, the rematches in the DLC where they took away a lot of your items and you only had maybe 5 arrows to use and you didn't have any swords or spears or anything. I found myself for those fights getting a little bit more creative. I had to use my runes a little bit more as weapons. So that was a layer of creativity in the second round of fighting them that I wasn't expecting.
We talked a lot about the bosses in the dungeons. I mean, this can also apply to the overworld. Did you feel satisfied about the premise of having like boss-like monsters out in the overworld that you just stumble across? And what kind of changes would you like to see that, if any, in the sequel?
I liked those more unique ones because there's really only there was the big moblins and then the centaurs, right? I mean, that's basically it. Like,
they
I
had
would
the
like
Moldugas, they had the stone taluses. They did have, I think there were 4 or 5 different ones, but you're right. I think the only variety that we had in them is that they had different versions of them. I think there was the volcano, the Elden stone talus was a little bit more fiery. The one in the mountains was a little bit ice.
Like I 4 or 5, that's actually more than I remembered, but like I would just more of those because it was the first time you ran into that giant moblin or goblin or whatever, like, you know, breaking through the trees and you just saw that thing sleeping. It was like, whoa, what did I come across here? Is it, you know what I mean? So I would like that moment more, and I think the way to do that would just have to be more types of those things, you know.
Yeah, I agree. More variety, I think, of that.
Yeah.
I didn't know if you had anything to say on that, Brad, or you pretty much just in agreement with that?
No, I mean, I think that was a good starting point for kind of what I like them to do, obviously, like, but they all said just a little more variation in that.
So I want to redirect
this. Brad, congratulations for beating it on master mode. That's
thanks.
That's like no small feat. I think I've got like 1 dungeon. That's like about the furthest I've gotten.
It gets easier as you go on.
Yeah. That's impressive, man.
Are we all in agreement that there should be some difficulty setting at the beginning of the game? Again, like just straight up, like don't have to do
that should be in every game.
Doesn't have to be
I'm always
DLC
for options.
I mean, even like a super easy mode, I would be.
It's an accessibility thing, I think.
Yeah, totally, absolutely, yeah.
Yeah, I feel good about them having that too. I was going to redirect the question about the overall bosses to you, Brad, and rephrase it as more about the structure of storytelling in the game as well, because this could potentially lead to a boss encounter. Because I'm not entirely familiar with either Kyle or Rebecca how much you've ever played of some other open world games. I'm going to bring up Ghost of Tsushima as the most recent example about how they handle narrative progression in a game beyond just like the main story quest. How it is completely optional to go to a lot of these other side areas, and should you go to those areas, you get these new side quest lines that have very intriguing stories that tell you more about the current region, about the characters of that region. So they culminate either in like a good payoff, whether it's a boss encounter, like in these, like a duel, or some kind of new ability or skill is equipped to you. Brad, I'm kind of curious, would you like to see more of that applied to Breath of the Wild? Like maybe them try and take that direction?
Sure, yeah.
Yeah.
Like you could just explore, like you get to know a region better by doing stuff like that. Like I just picture in my head, like one quest line is you like starting off fighting with Gorons and eventually culminating in a sumo showdown with Gorons, something kind of like Twilight Princess did. Something like that. You can get to know the citizens, like, because there's the people of the town, you know, and you kind of know a few of them. But maybe if you get to know the community a lot more, that'd be great.
Exactly what I was thinking of. Yes. So I'm curious go ahead. Sorry.
I like those big long-term side quests. There weren't that many in Breath of the Wild, but like buying the house, you know, which really
Terrytown,
yeah. Like I would love just like more of those, just like a handful of those. Like almost in like I would take fewer one-off side quests to have more like just big long-term things that you kind of touch on through the course of the game. Like I really love that stuff. That was something I totally missed. Like when I beat the game, I had to go back and find that, like, because I never found it. Like my wife started playing and she was like, "Oh yeah, I bought a house." I was like, "What? I've beat Ganondorf. I didn't know you could buy a house. That's incredible." Like I loved that kind of stuff that like was mechanically different from the rest of the game. You know, did something unique.
Yeah, the smaller ones felt very fetch quest type side quests. I don't really care for those too much. You're right. It's the ones like the Tarrytown quest that do shine, because you're right. It is over the length of the game. For the most part, it's not something you can really do all at once because you have to recruit all these people that you meet throughout your journey. So I think adding that that gives it a little bit of a layer of depth to it. I would prefer to see those types as well.
Yeah, glad to hear that. It's one of the things I think I want the most. Besides atmospheric dungeons returning, is them to kind of refine the quest structure in Breath of the Wild sequel to basically what everyone was talking about here. Would love
Feels
to
more
see
meaningful.
them have that. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Because I don't think they could play the same card again with the amnesia. Like, yeah, we're gonna figure out it's a mystery, so you're gonna have to like piece the puzzle together. It's like, not again.
Yeah,
Although I think there'll be a mystery.
Think of how sick it would be, Damiani, if like there's a Sidon like side quest where you just go with him doing quests throughout Hyrule and it just has some payoff or something relating to like Zoras or something like that. Like
Imagine
a quest line tied to a specific character you go through.
It could even culminate in a payoff where the previous game, Divine Beasts, affected your fight with Ganon.
Yeah, they could aid you at some point.
But this could go even further where you get like additional parts of an ending. Majora's Mask did this. You got some scenes completely omitted if you didn't have certain masks. Maybe if you didn't pursue all the major side quest lines with these side characters, they just don't appear in your ending or something like that, or you completely missed their storyline. And it's optional. It's still satisfied. It's like, I'm not into that. I don't need to do that. I still beat the game and enjoyed it. Or it's there for people who like it. I would love to see that for sure.
You mentioned Ghost of Tsushima. The big innovation they need to bring forward from that game is just loading.
Yep.
Yeah.
Fast travel loading.
Get that, those new SSDs and those Switch Pros, please.
I'll USB one of those into there if I can get it as fast to load as I did in Ghost of Tsushima.
That's a whole thing of speculation, is whether or not that Switch Pro is coming out early next year, like the rumors have said, and will Breath of the Wild 2 sequel even take advantage of that? Like, what benefits we'll get? And we don't really need to speculate about that. But if so, I mean, that, a visual bump would be nice, honestly, and slightly faster load times would definitely be welcome for sure. But yeah, Ghost of Tsushima was amazing with that. How far you'd pick on a map to warp, and it's like, I was like, yeah, that's kind of rough not having something like that in another.
It's hard to go back after that.
Yeah, I'm not quite. I feel like I might have missed something, so I'm going to give you a chance. Is there anything about the Breath of the Wild sequel we want to see that we haven't addressed, maybe that I just didn't think of? Because I feel like there's so much to talk about, and I just maybe missed something.
I want to swim underwater. Let me swim underwater again.
That'd be nice.
Some sick underwater temple again. Yeah, bring it back.
Go find some iron boots.
Something.
Iron boots.
Yeah.
The underwater, some caves, a lot of little exploration things that they could add in.
I would like a paraglider upgrade. I don't know what it is. I don't know if it's like
speed.
Yeah, or something like that. Like just like you can extend its wings so you go faster or further, or maybe you have like a single flap or something to get it a little higher. I don't know. I love that thing so much, man. Like I remember playing Horizon Zero Dawn right after Breath of the Wild and like jumping off a cliff and like pressing a button and being like, oh, it doesn't do anything. And like, even in Ghost of Tsushima, which I loved, I think that's like my favorite game so far this year, was like, I wish I had a parachute or something. I just want to jump off cliffs and fly,
Climbing cliffs, I think, has been like the biggest hurdle in any other open world game I've played. It's just something that I haven't. Now we've seen another game. We've now seen Immortals: Phoenix Rising is basically doing the same thing. I actually got hands-on with that game. It is surprisingly very much like Breath of the Wild. Like everyone who's reporting on it is very similar. But until that game comes out on December 3rd, there really hasn't been a game that lets you just like climb up everything like this. So I'm curious if there's. We talked a little bit about like maybe the hook shot or grappling hook could aid you in like climbing. Is there anything else you may want to see them do to like that system, like in like climbing up objects or anything that can make it more interesting? Because they'll still have wonder, I think, but will it get older maybe faster this time unless they do something different?
In Twilight Princess, you had boots that would let you walk on the ceiling.
Oh, yeah.
Something like that.
The iron boots did.
Yeah.
They're magnetic. Maybe you could, not all the way. Like there's some limitation they can apply to it, but maybe you could walk up the side of mountains. I don't know.
Yeah.
They also in
Do that.
Twilight Princess they had the spinner too, that on certain like types of textures, I think it was, that you could use that to get up a lot faster.
Yeah, that'd be cool too. Yeah,
That was such
I
an
would just like them to
underutilized
wholesale take that stuff. Like I would like to
Yeah.
find the spinner from Twilight Princess and just like there's just a little bit of dialogue. It's like, this is got some Twilight pun or something. I don't know. You know?
Oh my gosh! Imagine them giving you the spinner in the sequel, and like you basically just be like Link skateboarding across all of Hyrule with it,
Yeah.
just going up surfaces and
It's not out
stuff.
of
Yeah, I mean, you got the
Damiani.
shield
I know.
surfing already. You
Yeah.
know, yeah.
Yeah, like I
Hey,
just
if they
want up the
added a
shield.
motorcycle, they can add anything.
Mm-hmm.
That
Hell yeah.
Totally forgot they put a motorcycle in the game.
Yeah, as
Gosh.
they should. That's
Yes.
amazing.
I guess the only thing I was thinking about like is like a skill system with climbing, like your gear, like getting spiked
Upgrading
boots,
it?
or like an upgrade system that way you can like they
Give
already
me
had some
something
gear
where I
to
can climb in the
increase some
rain
of that.
without
But
sliding.
yeah, like definitively made it clear like you never have to worry about climbing in the rain with this gear, or you're gonna climb
Yeah.
minimum 3 times faster with these
Mhm.
spiked boots or whatever. Like you're just gonna like zip up there or something like that.
I mean, it could even be a clothing item, but it just is more
Yeah.
significant because, like, you could
Mhm.
find stuff that made you climb faster, but like, it would be cool, like you said, if you could find boots that made you climb like way faster.
Yeah.
Which was like, you would always put them on to climb. That'd be kind of cool.
The one other thing, I really liked the sword techniques that you learned throughout the course of the game in Twilight Princess and the Minish Cap. I think those were the two main ones that had it. So throughout the course of the game, you were learning all these different new ways to use your sword. Maybe you couldn't do it before, like the spin attacks and the strikes and all those things, just to give him another method of fighting.
Totally.
Yeah. I'm not sure if I want. There's always been a weird thing for me. Zelda's combat's always felt way more methodical and slower paced. Like it's like a sword fight, but it's never been like at the level of depth of like a Souls combat. It's not quite ever that level, but it's also not heavy like action focused like character action games, or even like it's in this weird space in between. And I've always kind of wondered if it could evolve beyond that in one of the other directions. I'm not sure. Maybe it's fine where it is, but as you said, like learning more techniques might be that measure to improve that and make it feel a little bit more rich and diverse than it has in the past. I feel like it does need some more oomph to it or something like that, and those are really good examples. Even just like the down thrust, just give me back the down thrust or whatever from like Zelda 2. Let me just down stab something, jump off a cliff, and it's like see if you land on it or not. Good luck. I mean, it kind of was already there, sort of, but I mean, making it look goofier, I think, would be kind of funny, or an up thrust or something like that. Whew. Breath of the Wild sequel. Do you think it's gonna be called Breath of the Wild and then have a subtitle, or do you think it's gonna be called something else, not even have Breath of the Wild in the title?
No, I think that's that. You can't. I don't think you can't not have Breath of the Wild in it, because that is, as people just call that game Breath of the Wild. They don't even call it Zelda. They don't call it the Zelda Switch game. They call it Breath of the Wild.
Oh, I actually disagree. I don't think it will have Breath of the Wild in the title. It isn't typically what Nintendo seems to do with their naming scheme for that series. Majora's Mask was a direct sequel for Ocarina of Time, and it didn't have Ocarina of Time in the title. Same thing with their other direct sequel games.
Phantom
when
Hourglass. Yeah, that's a good point. Yeah.
When they announced it, they just said the sequel to Breath of the Wild is in development. They didn't say no. They didn't really ever call it Breath of the Wild 2. That's what fans called it.
Correct. I tend to lean towards that as well. Their naming convention history does indicate that's the more likely scenario. How explosive in success and popularity Breath of the Wild has been, though, does give me pause that they might actually consider keeping that branding in some capacity for the sequel. I don't know if they'd be so bold as to ditch There Will Be No Legend of Zelda in the title. It'll be Breath of the Wild subtitle under that. So Breath of the Wild is now the title of the series. I don't know if they'll go that far, but I would not be surprised if they did that, even though I lean more on your side, Rebecca, that they're
It'll be a long title. The Legend of Zelda, Breath of the Wild, whatever comes next.
Yeah, that's I think they want to avoid that, honestly, but I'm just hope we see it sometime soon. It felt like it'd been a while since we saw it when we had the E3 teaser, and now with everything that's happened, it feels like that was like forever ago. So I'm just so excited to see it again at some point. But yeah, thank you. I think that's gonna wrap it up for this episode. Thank you so much, the three of you, for joining me, having these wonderful discussions about Breath of the Wild. And it's I guess it's gonna be a trilogy. I see people throwing that out there now. That's like with Age of Calamity and the sequel, it's gonna be a trilogy of games. Technically, I don't know if that's gonna be official or anything like that, but you know, we have a trilogy of Breath of the Wild, 3 Breath of the Wild style games, or theme games, I guess is the better way to put it. I want to thank everyone who submitted a question for this episode of Friend Code. To submit questions for episodes of Friend Code, you got to be a $5 and up patron. The week we're recording, I'll make a post letting you know what we'll be talking about and who the guest will be, or the panelists per se. And I will just take the questions you submit from you. So thank you, everyone who submitted questions that way. If you're a $5 and up patron, you're also part of our early access tier, where you get episodes of Friend Code and other of our shows and podcasts early. For everyone else who watches it when it goes up on YouTube for the public, thank you for watching it. However you feel you want to show your support, we are always eternally grateful. We do have some shout outs for the month of September 2020. These are $250 up patrons, so thank you very much. So shout outs to El Thanis, Greg the Dark Knight Kettering, Caleb Togi Crawford, and Jeff Zio VGM Easton. Shout out and thank you so much. Before we sign off here, I want to give both of you, Jeff and Kyle, a chance to let people know where they could follow you, and if you have any other projects you're working on right now that you want to maybe tease. Let's start with you, Rebecca. Where can people follow you if they want to check out more of your work?
Yeah, so I am at Forest Minish, Forest and then Minish, like the Minish Cap game, everywhere on Twitter, and I stream on Twitch as well. I'm also a staff writer at Twinfinite. I just reviewed the Super Mario 3D All-Stars, so you can read my review at twinfinite.net. I'm also the co-host of the Nintendo Shack podcast, part of the PSVG network of podcasts. We record every Thursday night, so you can check us out at Shack Life on Twitter.
Nice.
Cool. Yeah. I'm at Kyle M. Hilliard on Twitter. You can find me there. I'm also a co-host at MinnMax with 2 N's. So that's the best place to find me. The next big thing we're doing is we do a series called The Deepest Dive, where we go like super deep on specific games. Like we're doing Mario 64. I say we. I'm not in that one, but I hope you still watch it. But we're going to do 3 episodes on Mario 64, where we just like play a chunk, talk about it a lot, play a chunk, talk about it a lot. We've done Last of Us Part 2. We did the Final Fantasy 7 remake. So go check that out. And yeah, thanks for having me on. I really appreciate it. It's exciting to be on.
Yeah, thank you so much for doing this. These Zoom ones are always so, I mean, it affords me having guests from everywhere. So I love that. It's always so weird. I feel like the past few months it just comes across in all the Zoom style content we do, like not being there in person and stuff. Like it's just been kind of like a learning process doing it remotely. But I'm just always really thankful having all these guests and having you two show up to do this. It's just like, for me, it's like I'm very excited. I'm like, ooh, I got these guests. These are, like, there's always fun to, like, especially the Zelda episode, like Brad and like the other guys at Easy Allies. I love talking with Zelda about them all the time, but like sometimes I can never get enough, to the point like I in my mind I felt I was restrained this episode, but I'm gonna go back and edit it and I'm gonna be like, I talk too much, damn it. I talked way too much this episode, even with this. So the more people I could talk with Zelda about in general, just in his video games, I love, and you both were a blast and a pleasure to have on. So thank you so much for taking time.
Oh my gosh, I could talk about Zelda all day. So thank you so much for inviting me on.
For sure. If you're both open to it, I will definitely be having you back on at some point in the future. So thank you so much. And you, Brad, thank you so much for talking about Zelda.
Old news, dude. I'm always on here with you.
Thank you for indulging me with your achievements.
Yeah.
Thank you. It means so much to me. But that's going to wrap it up. So until next time, everybody, may the way of the hero lead to the Triforce.